Thank you for coming out over this on this climate-related cold and rainy day, and we'll talk a little more about that. I'm a physician also trained in public health and occupational and environmental medicine, and of course this is the greatest public health issue that humankind has ever faced, because we're talking about potentially human extinction and potentially not long from now, but we are not giving up. So I want to tell you a little bit about the climate mobilization. Climate mobilization says is that we are in abrupt climate change, and tipping points are tipping, and we need to get, and before you laugh over your lunch, we need to get, because it is possible, by 2025 to net zero carbon. That means getting to renewables and drawing down carbon. How many other people I know, have worked in hospitals? Okay, so you know, most hospitals still use the hospital operator in the nasal voice going, code blue, room 699. I mean, you hear the code blue, which now they may say, emergency team or something that sounds, but what code blue means is that somebody is experiencing a cardiopulmonary arrest. Now that's urgent, that's stat, right? You gotta do something about that. I want to also take a little pulse here. How many of you think that we are in a situation of abrupt climate change? Oh man, let's just sing together. Okay, then I don't have to use those. Okay, so let me see if it will move. And if you look at the women's faces, you see that they are focused. They are in what Margaret Klein Solomon has written about. She is the founder, a psychologist, of the climate mobilization. In this, I found on your desk, it's leading the public into emergency mode. So that means focus. That means sharing a common goal and a good goal, saving someone's life. And if you look at mainly it's the women that you can see. They don't look like they're thinking about themselves. They don't look like what they're going to do. When you're in this situation, it is almost a meditative state, because you have left yourself behind. And a lot of people say that you can't stay in such a mode all the time. And we actually, at the Climate Mobilization, believe you can be in emergency mode and actually feel better for it. Because there's a psychological term that I learned when I was training called turning passive into active. When you're passive, when you think you can't do anything, and when you're not doing anything, you actually are more miserable. When you're with the community, when you're with people who support you, there is a social exhilaration that actually feels good, so in and of itself is worth it. And there's also the chance you might just win. And I think we can. If I didn't, I'd be at home binge watching The Real Housewives of Berkeley and eating chocolate. But I'm here. Back. As you probably noticed, there was an orange cloud that descended over Washington recently. So we'll call that a code orange. And in a code, there is, I'm here to say, among other things, a silver lining to that orange cloud. And that silver lining is the fact that we're here, that people are showing. Have you noticed when you go to meetings of the multiple alphabet soup things that all of a sudden people are pouring in? So that's the good side. And that means years ago, like in the 80s, remember when Abby Hoffman, some of you won't, because some maybe weren't born yet, but he was going around with Amy Carter to campuses and trying to get people into social, political issues. And he said, our campuses have become hotbeds of student rest. I think that's what's happening in the communities. And if the orange cloud can bring out that silver lining, that's a good thing. Okay. Oh, it's working. So the climate mobilization, I basically said what it is that we are probably going to have to figure out ways besides planting trees and using biochar, both of which are great, and getting to renewables 100%. We have the technology. You all know Jacobson's work. It's the only reason he's saying 2050 is because of the political situation. But we could do it by 2030 easily. And I would say, and when I taught, and we use a World War II scale advisedly, because we don't mean anything like war. In fact, when you treat climate change, these medical words, you are treating the tendency toward violence, as anybody who's watched what happened in Syria and some of the other aspects of the Arab Spring knows already. I'll learn it. And you can see that what happened, it has to happen at a federal level. And so you're looking at me like I'm stark raving mad. Really? We got Pruitt? And yes, really, but we have to really push up. I won't call, it's not trickle up. It's a forceful, peaceful push up, and starting at every level. And that's what the climate mobilization wants. We need to start teams that really reach out to everybody. I'll talk more about that in just a bit. So the impacts, even though not all of these things remained realized very long, we certainly did win a war that we weren't prepared to fight. I mean, we're in Richmond. You know those big warehouses where they were turning out ships, like, what, more than one a day? Maybe that's overstatement, but lots of them. And we revved up. And
one was done in 4 days.
Oh, okay, now I'm leaving. Okay, anyway, amazing stuff. And around the country, similar things were happening. And we managed to get to do an impossible thing, because every sector of society, from the scientific to the engineering to women came out of, that were working in the house only, became Rosie the Riveter. And other, basically even business, and I'm not putting down any business people here, but they didn't Ford didn't actually go, yeah, I'll do it. Roosevelt knew how to step on a few toes to force people to do things. But basically, all sectors of society got involved. And so, remember peaceful mobilization. I'm going to try to go through this quickly. When I get to about the 30-minute, I guess John is supposed to throw a piece of fruit at me. So I'll know to go faster. So we have to start with this. This is one of the tenets of the climate mobilization. You got to tell the truth. And that is not happening a lot because people are afraid they will scare people. And, the truth is we got a narrow window that is still open before it's going to be too late. Is it really an emergency? And so this is stuff, you guys know this like the back of your hand, that we've been heating up, and if we go back to 1,000 years ago, and then we're kind of coming off the slide, but that's okay, you can see how the temperature has gone. Now we're at or above 1 degree Celsius, and I'm going to use Celsius instead of Fahrenheit most of the time. So that is unprecedented in recent times, obviously, as you can see from the graph. And that tracks, this is a graph that shows, it's coming off, that shows you that the most important thing is that the last 3 years have been, each one has been a record. Normally you get a sawtooth upward pattern when there's a trend. When there's a fever curve, if you see somebody coming in at 98.4, normal temperature, and then it starts kind of doing this, by the time they're 104 degrees Fahrenheit now, you're not going to say, well, that's just today, like a lot of deniers do. You're going to say, no, this is serious.
How come you didn't have it in chronological order?
That's the question I wanted someone to ask, but I didn't feel I had time. Because 3 years in a row is unusual. That's observant as heck, because I didn't make it when I first saw something like this slide. The reason is we're actually comparing to show you the exponentialness, if that's a word, it isn't, of the curve. But 1998 was a real bad one. Then you see that they're not necessarily in chronologic order. And that's what I mean by that sawtooth upward. You draw a line. A lot of deniers, as you know, will pick one period when it's down for 2 years and then say, oh, see, we're in a pause. But that's why, because you usually don't see 3 years in a row like that. The last time we saw it was 1939 to 1941. And 1941 turned out to be only the 37th hottest year now. So you see how quickly this is going up. Thank you for asking that question. And you know that the record hot days are shifting over, and there are fewer record cold days. So you know about droughts, floods, and all that stuff, and I wasn't going to go through. That's obviously going to be Katrina, which was a 100-year storm, and then a few years later, not the same kind of storm, but flooding in New Orleans, and this is Hurricane Sandy. And I just like to show you this picture because that's not, I lived in Manhattan many years, and the traffic, it doesn't usually look like that, but the traffic's better there. The polar vortices, you know that may be what we're experiencing here in California, and that the Arctic is heating twice as much as the rest of the world, and the mid-latitude areas are being affected. Oroville Dam for the first time in 48 years, and that's a few days ago in LA. Driving there was hell anyway. Let's just, you know about fires. This was clearly not taken in California, judging from the wildlife. And then you know about the loss of the rainforests and methane, and the fact that Larsen Sea is about to split off from Antarctica, and you know about ocean acidification, species extinction. Okay, let's go to, here's something I don't know if you know about. You've heard about it in Iceland a couple years ago. They were doing sort of a pilot project to see if they could mineralize CO2 in calcium carbonate type capture. And it was just like it was not really a big operation yet. And it still isn't big enough. But this is one of our hopes, is that we have to, if we're calling this a World War II scale mobilization, then, and I hate these words, they're like abhorrent to me, but a Manhattan Project for life would be something like doing the Icelandic project, which now involves 18 scientists from many different countries to draw down carbon and permanently get it into rock as like a calcium salt. Okay. Got to touch the right button. Okay, so more about us. And I want to talk about a hidden consensus. You've all experienced it. I mean, how many of you have been told that you really shouldn't tell the full truth because it will scare people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Yale Center.
Okay, thank you, Reverend. Yes, and I work with groups whom I love, with people whom I love, and I have been told that you need to bright side things. Why? Because this person, who's a very dedicated, brilliant person, said to me, because you can't scare people into action. You want to freaking bet? I skipped over that one. Oh, the silent consensus, by the way, who've said we've needed a World War II scale mobilization, are a lot of faces. You know, David Suzuki isn't included, Winona LaDuke isn't included, but lots of people, and it was touted in an article in New Republic, and Bill McKibben thanks us for leading the way because we're the ones with the big mouths. And why is it hidden? We talked about it. We're afraid we're going to scare people mainly. And so emergency mode, we talked about that focused action, like a code blue, could be a code orange too. And this is obviously a bit photoshopped. But do you think when there was an attack on our territories, on Pearl Harbor, do you think people were not, at least for a moment, scared? Of course they were. Did they then sit home and go, gosh, I wonder when the Japanese and Germans and Italians will arrive? Of course not. What they did is they sprung into action. And this is kind of an old-fashioned-y thing. And that had to happen, and we have to force it to happen at the federal level. But the consumers, people at home, at the home front did a lot too. Do you think that the vile war that my generation stood up against in Vietnam, do you think the boys were not afraid, and they were boys, were not afraid to go and kill somebody they didn't know and possibly be killed themselves? Do you think their parents weren't afraid? Yeah. Did they? Some went to Canada. But there's Agent Orange, speaking of Orange. They got out in the streets, and the important thing is not just a few times, but relentlessly, because they understood that they were relentlessly threatened. For them, this was an existential crisis, as it is for us today. So we have, this is just an example. Another one would be, that I'll briefly show you, is that people who were dying, I mean, like whole communities, I remember, were dying of the human immunodeficiency virus. And do you think that Ronald Reagan even mentioned it? No. He would not until a group called ACT UP basically got in everybody's face. They shut down the New York, for a little while, only the New York Stock Exchange. They did all kinds of fun direct actions for their lives. I'm offering, when people tell you that, like this leader in a major climate movement told me that when training speakers, you cannot scare people into action. I'm trying to give you also, but you probably already can make this argument.
We agree that we have to scare people. We agree.
I love you all. Can I keep coming?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so, okay, we know.
We're scared.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are developing, it's nearly completely developed. I'm going to give you a preview. You're the first, but I mean, it's obvious. A grand strategy. So obviously, as I said before, it has to be centralized, and there is a central group that happens to live on the East Coast that is helping us and who founded the movement. And then we need to start, and I'm going to invite you to start joining teams. We expect to have teams all around the country and even in other countries. And what these teams will do is basically receive trainings, and there's going to be a couple coming up in about a week. If you're interested, there's a sign-up sheet that has TCM on it. There will be online trainings that I can then email you about if you want to, about organizational things which you know a lot about, and about what our strategy will be. Obviously nonviolent, no discrimination, and of course, and it will all be laughing constantly without even being high, maybe. Outreach, the trainers will then train other people, and we're expecting this to be, I can't stand it, metastasize, if you will, so that more and more people become, because now people are ready. They weren't so much before. This organization was founded 2.5 years ago, and it did some amazing things. It had a plank in the Democratic platform put in. We didn't get a Democrat. I don't know what we got. But the thing is, now people are ready to hear this, and we need to make coalitions with people from all walks of life. Labor leaders, it doesn't matter what profession. We need to make coalitions with people who are fighting for social justice, especially environmental justice, but other things too. This is a labor group, not yet listening to us, but they will be. The pledge is useful if you can get people to sign it, and now it will become more useful. Okay, so this 1940s, 50s stuff, but obviously the basics of the pledge most of you have read, and that it is, you work hard for, you support only candidates at every level, city council, doesn't matter, that are aligned with our desires, with our concerns that we're in a climate emergency. Going to set up a group that will be meeting at Berkeley City Council to get them to declare a climate emergency. The school board should declare a climate emergency. Every group we can get, it can keep, we just have to be relentless. We want to get with our teams to meet up with local representatives, including mayors, including the same groups I'm telling you. This is the pressure from below. And and this is going to happen around the country because we have chapters around the country. And I think, and there are more and more people calling and joining. And it can include signing the pledge, but just being ready to declare a climate emergency, I think, would be a very powerful thing. In Berkeley, might that just be symbolic? Yeah, sure, because they have, but keep, you know, what starts in Berkeley doesn't stay in Berkeley. What starts in California doesn't stay here. And so it's still useful. Then we do power structural analysis where we look around and analyze who in our community. It's usually used in union organizing, but there's a woman named McElvey who's written a couple of really good books about it, about how you find out who's really in charge and meet up with them, because sometimes it'll surprise you, the people who have, you know, spiritual communities are great. The civil rights movement, that was a home and a place where just the ferment was so great. We backslid a bit, a lot, but that is a fertile place. So if these people just happen to be in, you know, come into a conference here, get all their signatures, but we have local people. I'm just thinking of person I know very well, that people who worked in NoCola in Oakland knows. This is Reverend Ken Chambers.
Ken Chambers was the main person leading the faith community. And
pressure has to grow. In Malvina Reynolds' words, will end if we don't get what if things don't go in our direction as quickly as we want it to. We'll be doing things that it isn't nice. In other words, not violent, but we'll be blocking the doorways and doing things that aren't polite, because all the nice things never work. So symbolic actions, die-ins involving artists, things like that. Media coverage should be very important. You all know this phrase. And when we have communities that are a united front, some of the people my age know what that means. But basically we want organizations of people who want justice for their communities. Think about DAPL, think about Black Lives Matter, think about any environmental justice thing, because we're all in this together. And now climate change not only can make all those dreams disappear, but by acting on it in unison can make all those dreams a reality in the future. And that's Naomi Klein's thoughts in This Changes Everything, as you know. And so if you get elected to be on the city council, all of this can be yours. But, and let's move into the State House. We're putting more pressure, aggressive state legislation. I don't know which groups you work with if you work with legislative groups, you take your pick. We're probably not going to get them to say carbon net zero by 2025, but we can force stronger ones, even than the good things that have happened recently with Senate Bill 350, et cetera. We can even push harder. And then this can be yours, which isn't as nice. That's the inside of the State House, not its best feature. And the East Coast team is going to be doing outreach and lobbying to local organizations that will lead them to candidates, and they actually have some insiders who know how to get to candidates, to members of Congress. They'll be doing the pledge gathering, and this is once again, they'll be blocking, now it's their turn, to block the New York City Stock Exchange and other things. And I would love to, and we're all invited to join them, but we want to work around the country. And so coming up to the 2020 election, it gets a little more strong. Indefinite occupations of areas. And people are willing to march on Washington when something very important is going on. And here something very important was going on, and there they were. Now this is several years later before we saw what this president necessarily could achieve, but this is our first non-white president, our person of color. And on Obama, that was giving his inaugural address. That's how many people were excited and showed up. So people can be mobilized. They just have to be relentless. Okay, and then we'll increase pressure by blocking things. A lot of people don't like to block bridges, and I kind of see that because I think about ambulances. Can't stop being a doctor. But political offices, and It makes me feel young again, my campus. This was happening relentlessly during the Vietnam War, as you all know, or a lot of you know. And then local marches, civil disobedience, and we're going to have days of national strike. And that will be coordinated. And I'm not saying that one happens directly after another. It's just going to be this sweeping way. We're probably going to be doing them all at once in one way or another. So that's really it. It's a code blue to maintain a planet that is graced by life, and including the green parts of life. And this is the best thing you can ever do. So I appreciate your time. I really do.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Really, I appreciate it. Thank you for all your work.